Yeah, that's kind of where we're sitting in this 25 class. Obviously, we'd love to add Nasir Wyatt to this class and, continue pushing forward up with these quality recruits.
And look, let's talk about as well what this means for this class. I think last year, what did you guys end up with? About 25, 26 commits, not including the transfer portal. Sound about right? Right around
That's
that
yeah, I
spot?
don't have an exact number, but yeah, right in that ballpark.
Right in that ballpark. So again, now we're going to talk about projections where you think you guys head in this next season, where your focus is going to be with five, looking like six commits thus far. It's interesting to break it down of what is the important part of need. Again, that's something that people kind of overlook when it comes to recruiting of how do we fill up these 25, 26 commits, right? Where do we need to put our focus on? Is it cornerbacks? Is it defensive linemen? Is it offensive linemen? You put together your little projections here, so let's hop into that and you can speak on that some.
Yeah, so we'll just run right down the line, touch on every major position group. I am going to start off by prefacing that this projection is not going to be perfect. There is a lot of moving parts that have to take place. There are going to be transfers that are going to happen. There's NFL decisions that are going to be made, and every year that we take a look at early on at what our scholarship projection is going to look like come early signing day. If you take a look and the early months, the Februarys, the Marches, what it looks like in December, January is typically not close, just because there are so many moving parts, so many things that take place. Um, with that being said, this is my kind of breakdown for everybody just to kind of get a small window into what this 25 class could look like. Starting off with the QB position. Uh, Obviously, we've secured the commitment of Akili Smith Jr. And like I said, he's probably the one in this class, regardless of who commits going forward, that I'm most confident that continues to sign with the Ducks here. In addition to him, I think, it's possible we take another quarterback. With remaining eligibility, we're looking at Dante Moore, Luke Moga, and Austin Novosad, in addition to Akili Smith Jr. So I could see them trying to pick up another scholarship quarterback. I could also see the case being where, Akili Smith is the lone QB commit in this class. So like I said, a lot of that kind of depends on the Dante Moore development coming into the 24 season. Um, the running back position to me is a pretty interesting one. I can see two of them happening. Currently with the remaining eligibility going into 25, there's Noah Whittington, Jordan James, Jaden Lamar, DeJohn Riggs, and, D2 transfer Jay Harris, who are all going to have remaining eligibility. The thing that makes this one particularly interesting is there's a real possibility that Noah Whittington and Jordan James move on after this season. Jordan James started the year as the number 3 RB last year, and I think he was averaging over 6 yards a carry. So that just kind of tells you the potential there. And if he has another major year like we were expecting he does, there's a real chance that, he takes advantage of the garnered NFL interest and moves on to the next level. Um, the tight end position, this is one where I think at least two. Um, going into next year, there's Kenyon Sadiq, AJ Pugliano, and Roger Saliapaga, where, if we're really thinking about what this means, Kenyon Sadiq, he has all the potential in the world, and he's someone who I think is going to be a wonderful asset to the Ducks, probably this year and moving forward. But there's not a lot of experience in that room behind him. So we're really one injury away from the depth being a glaring issue in the tight end room. So I do see us grabbing two tight ends in this class. I know we're currently trending heavily for Deshaun Brame. And, Ben Roberts, he's another one who we've been trending for as of recently. We'll see how that one plays out. But when I was all said and done, I do think we signed two of these guys. Um, the wide receiver position, this is another fairly interesting one just because we have two commits already to this point. With that being said, there is a lot of attention being garnered toward Dallas Wilson specifically. As I mentioned, Florida State and Miami, they're really pushing hard to get him on campus. The continued recruitment, which is, not necessarily a bad thing just because we understand the potential that this man has. If we're able to hold on to both of them, I could still see two additional wide receivers coming in. Although, with that being said, there is possible remaining eligibility for Evan Stewart, Gary Bryant Jr., Kyler Casper, Jurian Dickey, Dylan Grisham. We had a very deep class this year, including Jeremiah McClellan, Jack Ressler, Ryan Pelham. So, there's plenty of bodies in there. It's just going to come down to a matter of the experience once again heading into next season with, major dependency on like what Evan Stewart decides to do. So that's another position where I could see them dipping
You
into
had
the portal just to get
You had 7 last year. So if there's a place that you don't need to necessarily fill up on, that's probably a position group. Tight end, you didn't have any. So just again, I kind of wanted to allude back to where you were, guys. I mean, 7 wide receivers is a lot. And I don't, I'm counting. I want to say it doesn't include the transfer portal, but I believe it is counting the addition of Evan Stewart as well. So just without Evan Stewart, you had 6 last year. So I think you're on point with 2 to 3. It's probably enough.
Yeah, and it's like, we're still sitting at, I think we're sitting at 7 scholarships over the limit. So come the spring portal, I wouldn't necessarily be
Mm.
crazy surprised to see a guy like Kyler Casper hitting the portal. Jurion Dickey's one I really pray that they're able to hold on to, just because I think he'll have an expanded role this year. But you never know how that stuff plays out. So wide receiver, that's an interesting one. I don't think we go wide receiver heavy in this class by any stretch. But that still remained to be seen. Um, and finally, wrapping up on the offense with the offensive line. This is the one, in my opinion, that is likely the most important on the offensive side of the ball. So going into next year, we're losing at least 4 starters, which is, well, I shouldn't say at least. We're losing 3 starters. I think we're going to end up losing 4. I think Josh Connerly is probably going to head to the NFL after this season if he has a year like he did last year. Continues to put on the size, gain the experience. So we're going to end up seeing a transition in the line similar to what we saw from 22 to 23, where we lost, I think, 4 out of our 5 starters. It's going to happen again heading into the 25 season. I think they're going to try really hard to retool this position, especially hard. Um, as we saw, that retooling is not necessarily a bad thing. They only allowed 5 sacks this year, and this was their first year as a true cohesive offensive line with this specific position group. So I believe in the development that takes place, but man, to lose 4 offensive line starters out of your 5 man is that's a tough bid. So I do think they're going to go heavy in the offensive line in this year's class, especially. Um, and then transitioning to the defensive side of the ball, the interior defensive linemen, I think we're probably looking at 2 to 3. Everybody knows this is where we went really heavy the last 2 years and taking some of these, elite prospect talents. Um, it's just there's not a lot of experience that is to be had currently with this position group, especially going into next year. Really, your only losses on the interior are Keon Ware Hudson and Jamari Caldwell, the Houston transfer. But until someone truly proves that they are able to step up and be that consistent piece in that rotation, I do think they're going to try to add 2 or 3 high quality pieces in this position group, especially. If we know anything about Dan Lanning and his recruitment style over the last 2 years, it's the fact that they're going heavy in the trenches. I think that trend kind of continues heading into next season as well. Uh,
Coming from, I mean, again, being under Kirby, and I think he's trying to emulate that same style of building. I would expect probably on the line, O line, D line, always a minimum of 4. And yes, you did well last year with 6. You had 4 offensive linemen last year, but like you stated, offensive linemen, they are becoming, I mean, they've always been very important, but they are just solely highly sought after. That you've got to stack that thing full so you can develop guys that may not, develop or excel as quickly as you would like them to. So yeah, I think you're spot on with the linemen. I mean, if it's anything what Georgia does, they stack that room full regardless of what the last 2 years were. It's unreal. Like they just pile them in one after the other. Next, and I expect Lanning to do the very very similar.
Oh yeah, and like I think there's 10 scholarship players that are going to be on the roster next season in that interior defensive line. But we know in that competition, the cream always rises at the top. We expect those guys to hold on. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these younger guys who may not see the field this year, in particular, dip into the spring portal when it opens up. But yeah, we'll see. If we know anything about Dan Lanning and the Georgia lineage that took place, he's going to retool that room and he's going to keep that a point of emphasis, no matter what. How many people are under scholarship currently. And then just smoothly transitioning over to the edge and the outside linebacker position. Although Nasir Wyatt has not committed to the Ducks at this point, 3 crystal balls from the Big 3 and the On3 network. That typically is a very good sign of things to come. So with him included, I could see at a minimum 2 more added. It's another position group where we've seen it time and time again where they try to dip into this recruiting pool and just retool, breed that competition and practice, and see who comes out on top, who's able to be that everyday guy. I think the only person they're losing is Jordan Birch from this class, which, don't get me wrong, big clog in that defensive line, but there's plenty of tools for them to be able to reload there. So I think we see at least two there. Could definitely see the possibility where they go even heavier in that position group, just because, as we all know, that's a premium position in every program. You can never have enough edge rushers who garner that elite talent. Um, the inside linebacker room, I think we're going once again at least two. We are losing Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs going into next season. They're playing big pieces, particularly Jeffrey Baza. He's been a staple in that Oregon linebacking room for a number of years now. It was big that he announced he's coming back for a final season this year, but going into next season, they're going to have to recalibrate that position group. And they do have a ton of young talent at that position group in general. Devin Jackson, Jerry Mixon, Kamar Matudi, Braden Platt, Dylan Williams, but the thing about that is they're all young. So, I do think they attack that position in the recruiting cycle once again. But if I would have to project a place in the portal going into next season that they try to address, I could see him picking up some experience in that room in particular. And then, in my notes here, I kind of combined the cornerback and the safety room, but they're losing a lot of talent in the secondary. Cam Alexander, Brandon Johnson, Tysheem Johnson, Dante Manning, Jabbar Muhammad, Nico Reed, and Kobe Savage are all out of eligibility after the season. So our secondary is going to look vastly different heading into next year. They've done a very nice job addressing the secondary in the recruiting class over the last 2 years in particular. Guys like Tyler Turner, Dakota Fields, Ife Obadigwu, Aaron Flowers, like these guys are going to have to step up in a big way in order to really make an impact going into next season in particular. Well, excuse me, the 25 season. It's definitely another position group that I think is uh, a very possible portal entry. I think Dan's going to dip into it heavy, just like he did this year. Coming into this 24 season, we could have seen it where they have the guys where you could have put together a competent secondary, but as we know, competition is everything. So they decided to go heavy in the portal, bring in a whole ton of talent, and create that depth in the secondary. So I think we're going to see something very similar heading into the 25 season, and I think we'll see a couple portal guys come into the Oregon roster at that point.
The portal it's a need now. It's definitely a functioning asset. It's not just something you can kind of plug and play. You have to make it part of your process. So it's not a bad thing to rely on it for certain areas. I think a lot of teams are utilizing it. Would you feel? I mean, again, with what you just stated, the entire secondary is going to be gone. I wouldn't say it's an all-in year, but you got to look at it kind of like Michigan was this past year. Ole Miss seems to be FSU last year, right? This is you're now you lost Bo Nix. But with getting Dylan Gabriel, you're not really taking a step back in that position outside of learning a new system. So you really have elevated everywhere around it. Now I know you've had some holes to fill in the trenches we've talked about, but you gotta look in a good way. Here's a good thing. I'm saying it's all in, but I don't think you're going to go anywhere in the next couple of years. You're not just selling the farm to make this work like the Rams did, right? And I think FSU, they're going to have some areas to come back from. I think Michigan's going to have a down step. Let's say you don't get it done this year. I don't think you take that big of a step back next year either. But you got to think that, hey, we're primed to meet up with the O, which we've talked about in October. There was an Ohio State guy that commented on the channel, says I'm tuning in for that October matchup. I feel like that's going to be the big time play here.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's you take a look at this roster right now. It is deep. You go 2 and 3 guys deep right now of guys that I would put on the field, and I would be especially comfortable having them on. But when you bring in this much talent, especially from the portal, you kind of get that sense of urgency that, hey, I would really like to get something done this year in particular. So yeah, I would say this is about as close as we're gonna see to an all-in year in terms of just what you're bringing in the portal, what you have in the recruiting depth that you have brought in. But going into next year, like you said, there may not be that drop off, but it's going to be highly dependent on what the development of these
Sure.
23 and 24 class guys look like. So if the development kind of takes place like we think it's gonna, like, a guy that I'm looking at in particular is Aaron Flowers, the safety out of Texas. That was a big land for the Ducks. If he kind of develops to what he could be, I think there's a real possibility in 25. He's a staple in that secondary. You don't really have to worry about that position in particular. But to your point, I think what we're going to see is I think they're going to bring in that depth again to try to recalibrate. And that's that's the bright side of the portal. So
Sure.
programs like Oregon, they don't necessarily take that massive step back because they're able to plug their holes with the portal edition.